Hey everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Cool stuff to talk about today. So today we're continuing in Unit 8 of Economic and Personal Finance, which is critical consumerism. So today we're going to specifically talk about the laws that are in place in order to make the market favorable to consumers. The entire economy runs off consumers buying things. So not surprisingly, there's a lot of rules in place that protect consumers, and that's what we're going to talk about today, is the laws in place by the government that protect you, the consumer. Let's go ahead and get started. So today we are going to specifically be talking about consumer protection laws. Consumer protection laws is the large overarching term for all the different government bodies and the laws that are in place that protect you, the consumer, from shady business practices. So let's go ahead and get started here. And I want to point out that a lot of these, as I call them, shady business practices, aren't necessarily companies out here to do you harm. That's not really their goal. Their goal is to make money. They're for-profit companies. So without government regulation, we've realized that these businesses will very often put profits ahead of ethics and safety standards. So the government put these rules and laws in place to help even the playing field so that you know exactly what you're buying. So the first one we want to talk about today is information disclosure. These are rules put on companies that require them to disclose information. All right, and it comes in a variety of different ways. If you ever look at the nutrition labels on the back of any type of food, and we're going to talk about this more later, you're going to see there's a list of ingredients. Now, they do this so that they can't be adding things in that could be unhealthy, or if you're allergic to something, you know exactly what's in all the food. Pro tip here, since all of these, a lot of these foods have like special recipes, they don't really tell you how much of each one of these things are in it, but the rule here is whatever the most amount is has to come first. So like in whatever we're looking at here, the number one ingredient is corn syrup. That means there's more corn syrup than any other ingredients, and as it goes down, it's smaller and smaller and smaller amounts. Another information disclosure is, you've seen this recently on menus at restaurants. They have to start telling you how many calories are in it so that you can make better decisions. Another one on cigarettes, and this was a big one when this came out, that because cigarettes have been known to cause cancer, it has to be put on the cigarette packs. Cigarette companies aren't choosing to do this. They're required to do this by law due to information disclosure. Let's talk about other ones. So those are ones that happen all the time that they're aware of, and you can still make a choice in advance with that information disclosure. Let's talk about the information disclosure rules that the government really does not, or these companies really don't want to show. So, and these are specific examples. So in 2017, Equifax, which is supposed to check your credit score and be safe, it got hacked. All right. Now that's absolutely not supposed to happen, but 147 million U.S. citizens exposed. That's about half of U.S. citizens, meaning somebody hacked in and had access to your credit score and social security number and stuff like that. That is wild and awful. And Equifax, when that happened, they couldn't just ignore it. They were required by law to go out and tell the public their big mistake. All right, that is information disclosure. They absolutely didn't want to do this because obviously that really hurts their company, but that's information disclosure. It helps the consumer so you know when these things happen. Here's another one, Volkswagen. So there's emissions test on cars, meaning that it has to be a certain amount of cleanliness in order to pass these inspection tests. Volkswagen passed them all with flying colors for a really long time, and they were diesel cars. A lot of Volkswagens have turbo diesel in them, which most cars run on unleaded, they run on diesel, but they were super clean and really advertised that. Come to find out, Volkswagen had been secretly being shady, and this was on purpose, obviously, to sell more cars, that whenever you hook the machine up to test it, the car ran completely different than it normally does, and it makes it look like it's a really clean emissions car, when in actuality, it's not. And so it was a whole on purpose way of kind of scamming everybody. Volkswagen got in a bunch of trouble. They had to present this in the Information Disclosure Act, tell everybody they had done this, and they also had to like refund people their cars if they were upset about this enough. So that was the information disclosure. Probably the one that I remember the most being shocking. And again, this was already a decade ago because I'm old. In 2013, Target got hacked, and they like 40 million names, credit card numbers, debit card numbers, security codes, passwords if you'd been online. All of that got stolen, and Target had to turn around and pay tons and tons, like billions of dollars, in order to correct this mistake. And they were required by law, when all their customers' information got stolen, to tell the world about it. And with information disclosure, Target, I remember, was one of the very first ones when like the little chip readers come out, which now a lot of people are doing, like the Apple Pay and things like that. But the chip reader, instead of just swiping a card, it had a little chip on your card. And Target was one of the first companies I knew to go to that, and that was in response to this. And then maybe by the time you're watching this, that's already an obsolete technology. But Target, they had to tell everybody that they got hacked, even though they're a private company, with information disclosure. So the entire purpose of consumer protection laws is to help you be informed and prepared and know when things happen. So it's supposed to help customers. So what is the main purpose of consumer protection laws? It's to protect customers from fraudulent, deceptive, and unfair business practices, so that you know what's going on. So they can't like hide in the background when these things happen and not fix it. So pause me, answer that completely. We're moving on. All right, another set of consumer protection laws are safety standards. There is an entire company out there called the Consumer Product Safety Commission. All right. So what they do is they look at products and decide whether or not they're safe or not. One of the most famous, so maybe for y'all, I was going to use this example. It was the Samsung 7 in the 2010s, like 2017, I want to say, that would like occasionally catch on fire. I mean, a small percentage did, and they recalled that. And that was a cell phone. I was going to use that, and I said, no. Let's use the one from the 80s. That is probably the most famous, wildly unsafe tool of all time. Toy, I should say. Lawn darts. So lawn darts are literally it comes with these rings. You put them on opposite sides of the yard, and then you toss these lawn darts and try to get them to land. You throw them up in the air, and they come down, they land in the circle. Seems fine, right? Well, when people were dying from this because those metal pieces would hit people in the head that were standing next to it, they recalled that. So lawn darts is probably one of the most dangerous toys in the history of the world. And that's not the history of the world, but you know, in modern times. I'm exaggerating there. But these were extremely dangerous. They're extremely illegal. I think Nerf has them now where they're like got bean bags on the bottom of them. But yeah, these were wildly dangerous. And they were on the market for like 15 years. And before the United States government and the Safety Commission stepped in and said, nope, that's not a thing. And they'll take these unsafe products off the market. Here's another one. Occupational safety and health, also known as OSHA. So OSHA basically goes to construction sites and makes sure that they are following all the rules they have prescribed for them. And if they're not, they can shut them down. Because construction sites, their goal is to make things as fast as possible and move on and make them fast and well and move on purely because they make more money that way. Safety, being safe, making sure you have a harness that you don't fall off or die, that takes time. So the government has to be very heavy-handed in a lot of construction sites and making sure that they follow these rules. And OSHA is very, very picky, but these were in 2019. So OSHA shows up at these sites all the time and checks for this. These are the top 10 violations that they saw. Hazard communication, not like informing people when there's hazard, scaffolding. These types of things are very common to OSHA, and you see them a lot. But this is all about being able to be as safe as possible. So here's another one for safety. The FDA. And I think we had mentioned this in the previous unit, but the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, their job is to make sure that safe products, especially when it comes to food and drugs, make it onto the shelves. Probably the most famous recent example, based on the time I am recording this, is the COVID-19 vaccine. So COVID-19 obviously was rampant, and they wanted to create a vaccine for it. And so before these companies who made this vaccine could prescribe it to the public, the FDA had to give it the thumbs up. So the FDA went and looked at it with all the information that they had at the time, and the FDA is very strict on what gets passed. But the FDA gave it the thumbs up, and then the COVID vaccine was released to the masses. But that is just to make sure that you're not injecting people with bleach. I don't know. So the FDA is there to make sure that the food and our drugs that we use on a regular basis are safe to the best of their ability. So the question here is, what is the purpose of safety standards? And it's obviously just trying to protect consumers from unsafe products. So pause me, answer that completely. We're moving on. All right, now what happens when something still bad happens to you? All right, so these other fail-safes haven't happened, and you have a problem, like a company has really messed up. How can you respond or fight back? Well, those are collectively referred to as redress mechanisms. So redress mechanisms are a way that you can fight back against companies or businesses that have clearly done you wrong, either financially, physically, safety, or something like that. So if it's something huge and really, really big, you could have a class action lawsuit, which our court system allows to be set up, which means a whole bunch of people all over the country collectively come together and sue companies as one big group. This is devastating for companies, and they are terrified of a class action lawsuit because this is huge. Probably one of the most famous examples of this, and there's quite a few. There's a class action lawsuit against Volkswagen, but the tobacco company, and it was closer to like 250 billion. This just happens to be what was on the newspaper here. But in the 90s, because tobacco had said for a long time, oh, we don't cause cancer, we don't have all these health downsides, wanting people to buy their products. Once it was proved empirically that it does cause a bunch of health issues, then people got a class action lawsuit and sued the tobacco company, who knowingly claimed that it did not cause health issues, which they had done since the beginning of time. And the jury agreed with the class action lawsuit and made big tobacco, mean multiple tobacco companies, made them pay $145 billion, according to this newspaper article. There were other class action lawsuits, and it ended up being closer to like 250 billion with a B. So that is one redress mechanism, is a class action lawsuit. But say it's on a much smaller scale. Then you literally take it to small claims court. Let me give you an example of when this would be used. Say you have somebody, you hire somebody that's a company, it might be 5 guys, but they show up to build you a deck on your house. And you pay them like half the money up front, and then they just don't show up to ever build your deck. And they took half the money. They took like thousands of dollars from you. Well, you could take them to small claims court and says they breached your contract. We had a contract for this. I'm suing them and I want my money back. And so you can take them to small claims court for breach of contract. So on a smaller scale and smaller businesses use a small claims court. There's also a whole nother division, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Now, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, they really look at these interest rates very heavily. That's a lot of what they do to make sure these payday loans and all these, which are really predatory loans, and we've talked about that, to make sure that they fit into the law and that there is some regulation over them. But one of the more famous things that they are famous for is, within the last 10 years, Wells Fargo, big national bank, got in a bunch of trouble because they were creating fake accounts. So what was happening is they were giving bonuses to people that worked at Wells Fargo based on how many new accounts that they opened. And there was no rhyme or reason to it, just how many people can you get to open new accounts? Hooray. Well, what people were doing is people would show up and they're like, I'd like to open a checking account. They're like, cool, fantastic. here's a checking account for you. And then when they leave, they take their information, they just give them and open up 3 or 4 more accounts. There's nothing in those accounts, but those people that now have accounts in their names don't even know it. It doesn't necessarily negatively impact them, but you can't open up accounts for people without them knowing, and that is a huge no-no. And that was a widespread issue with Wells Fargo. And Wells Fargo, all right, got basically the government came in, the financial agency, and their redress mechanisms was make sure that they fixed it, had to pay a bunch of money in fines, and then they had to publicly disclose this to the public that they had done this. So that is the financial aspect of some of these redress mechanisms that the government oversees. So the question here is, what do redress mechanisms provide customers with? And it's basically just legal recourse if you've been wrong. It's a way of fighting back against companies that have done you wrong. So pause me, answer that completely. We're moving on. All right. Consumer education. This is a huge part of the consumer protection laws, because an educated consumer is a lot less likely to get stuck doing something they don't want to do. So here's some examples of ways that the consumer protection laws try to educate consumers. So the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, all right, which is, again, their job is to protect America's consumers. They literally have a whole website on trying to inform you and teach you about scams. So share what you know, stop scams. It's called Pass It On. So the FTC runs an entire website to educate people called Pass It On to try to prevent people from getting scammed. Another example of this is the U.S. Customer Product Safety Commission. We've already talked about this. This is the ones that got rid of the lawn darts. So the Consumer Product Safety Commission actually also has a website. So their website, in order to educate people, is kind of the opposite. They want you to educate them. If you've bought a product, you're like, yeah, I'm buying a baby doll, and it shows up and it's a hand grenade. You're like, that's probably not good. That you can go to this website under the Consumer Protection Safety Commission and basically tell them about the issues that you're having. You can also go here, and if you get that, be like, does anybody else notice this? And you can go search recalls and basically find out if they've already known about this issue and if there's a recall and if you can get your money back for it. So that's another way for consumer education there. The FDA. So the FDA, the FDA is responsible for a very important thing that if you've grown up in America and you've ever seen commercials, you've probably seen this and you may have never thought about it, but it seems kind of odd. So there's a lot of medications that are advertised on TV in America. That's kind of weird to happen. Other countries come here and like, you're advertising like medicine on TV? Well, at the very end of all those commercials, they start talking really fast. And I grabbed this one here. It says medicine commercials. At the very end, they're like, may cause depression, suicidal thoughts, internal bleeding, or death. But then everybody's like super happy in the commercial. So they talk about all these benefits, real slow and happy in these medicine commercials. And at the end, they start listing all the side effects. And it's like, what? Who would ever use that medication? Well, those are very small chance that those things can happen. If it's on TV, the FDA has already approved the product. However, the FDA has a rule for consumer education. If you're going to advertise your product on TV and you're going to tell them how good it is, you also have to tell them the possible side effects. And even like, but it's only like in 0.0001% of the people. And the FDA is like, you have to inform them without being shady. So that is why they talk kind of fast at the end, but it is clear, letting you know what the side effects are, and that is an FDA regulating with consumer education. So that is why at the end of those commercials, they said they wouldn't want to say all that because that's less likely you try their product, but they're required by law for consumer education purposes. So the question here is, what is the purpose of consumer education programs? And it's just to let you know about your rights and responsibilities in the marketplace. But pause me, answer that completely with what we've talked about. And we're moving on. All right, so a huge part of, and this is more an abstract term, abstract concept. huge part of the consumer protection laws is trying to make it a better place for consumers to function and buy things. So collectively speaking, the goals here in the consumer protection realm is to prohibit unfair trade, all right? Because unfair trade ends up negatively impacting not only other businesses, all right, that can't compete, but it also ends up hurting the consumers. Because on top of prohibiting unfair trade, these companies and these government entities are also supposed to regulate monopolies, and they're also supposed to promote transparency. So the reason they do all this, all right, is monopolies, all right, if they come in and they control, and as one company controls the whole industry, if there was one cell phone carrier, they're going to jack up the prices because you can't go anywhere else. You'd have less choices and prices are higher. That is not good for the consumers. So the consumer protection agencies, they want to make sure, once again, that they're regulating any monopolies that exist and preventing them from existing, prohibiting unfair trade, regulating monopolies, and promoting transparency. The reason they do this, they're trying to increase your choices. So you have more choices of things to buy, trying to create competition in the marketplace. And when they create competition, you have more choices and prices are lower, which is absolutely the perfect example. So we talked about, like, you know, the perfect market doesn't really exist, but fair competition is something that is actively strived for by the government to make sure that you have the most choices possible, paying the lowest price that is fair for everybody involved. So that's the question. What is the benefit of fair competition for consumers? So pause me, answer that completely. That's what I got for you guys today. See y'all tomorrow.